I haven't disclosed one issue to my doctors, and it may jeopardize the likelihood of undergoing skin removal. The narrative of Tammy Slaton is among the most compelling and tragic tales ever told on reality television. Audiences had mixed reactions to her appearance on 1000 Bean Sisters. Some were supportive of her survival, while others were dubious of her decisions. However, as the years passed, her life turned into a roller coaster filled with near-death experiences, drastic weight loss, broken relationships, and terrible family tragedies. Millions of people wept as what was supposed to be a show about transformation became an unvarnished examination of hardship, loss, and resiliency. Today, we will revisit Tammy Slaton's sad journey, not as a headline, but as the tale of a woman overcoming insurmountable obstacles. The time of feeling. Everyone began to talk about Tammy. When viewers first saw Tammy Slaton on TV, they weren't just watching another reality TV competitor. A woman who appeared to be carrying the weight of survival itself with every breath was seen by them. There was something about Tammy that instantly captivated others. Vulnerable, but determined to be seen, defiant, but fragile. When she appeared on screen, it was hard not to feel something. It was a mix of sympathy and a wish to see her succeed for some spectators. Others found her reluctance to adapt to be frustrating. Her reality TV adventure was set against this backdrop of adulation and frustration. When Tammy was taken to the hospital and put in a medically induced coma during the third season finale, it was the most memorable moment. The fan base was taken aback by the news. Overnight, expressions of sorrow, terror, and bitter criticism flooded social media. Some were already in sorrow, believing that the end was near. She was subjected to harsh criticism from others, who said the circumstances were a natural result of her decisions. But there was no denying that Tammy was more than a single woman's personal battle. She had come to represent a broader public discourse on issues like obesity, addiction, responsibility, and empathy. However, that was only a brief part of her much lengthy tale. A television program didn't start Tammy's problems overnight. They had been developing for decades, beginning in a youth in which trauma, weight, and health subtly interacted to create the conditions for the struggles that ensued. Stepping back into Tammy's early years, when her tale was still being written out of the public eye, is necessary to comprehend the heartbreak that fans would eventually experience. Weight and suffering molded a childhood with heavy roots. Tammy's early years did not resemble the fairy tales that most people associate with girlhood. She had to face the shadow of obesity from a young age. Unlike many kids who played freely in playgrounds or had carefree school days, Tammy already had a burden that was too great for her age to comprehend. Due to her size, she had experienced bullying, loneliness, and an increasing sense of humiliation by the time she was a teenager. What had begun as baby weight soon turned into a potentially fatal condition. Her weight by adulthood was more than 600 pounds. She reportedly peaked at over 700 pounds, according to sources. These figures weren't only figures. Her daily reality was defined by them. Simple activities like getting into bed or taking a shower were extremely difficult, and walking without assistance became impossible. Tammy's condition worsened to the extent that she needed oxygen to breathe. Her body's limits controlled every stage of her existence. However, the physical aspect only revealed a portion of the tale. There were deeper challenges that frequently went unnoticed under the weight. Early depression was followed by times of despair and thoughts of suicide. The body that was visible to the outside world was dangerously overweight. Tammy's thinking was frequently filled with hopelessness. She had little access to resources and little opportunity for appropriate care. Neglect prevented early intervention, allowing her health and weight problems to worsen until they reached a catastrophic stage. Tammy continued to live this way into adulthood. She was more than simply an overweight woman trying to shed pounds by the time the cameras started filming her. She had overcome years of adversity, trauma, and struggles with mental health. Unexpectedly, reality TV suddenly presented her with a chance to alter and get recognition. However, it had repercussions she was not yet able to comprehend. Sisters, a camera, and lights. How reality television paved the way. In January 2020, TLC introduced 1,000-pound sisters, which seemed like a simple concept. Two sisters who want to use weight loss to take back their life. Amy and Tammy were shown as devoted siblings who were united not only by blood, but also by their common battle with weight. Hope, responsibility, and change were all offered by the program. Initially, the idea struck a chord. Viewers witnessed two women encouraging one another, laughing at uncomfortable doctor visits, crying during setbacks, and candidly talking about difficulties that most people encounter in private. Though untidy and unpolished, it seemed authentic. Because Tammy didn't suppress her feelings, whether they were rage, vulnerability, or sardonic humor, her presence stood out. She turned into the person whom everyone was talking about, for better or bad. The cameras have both advantages and disadvantages for Tammy. On the one hand, she would not have had access to doctors, diet programs, and other resources if she hadn't been on the show. It provided her with a supportive audience, and that reinforcement was important. Conversely, the examination was harsh. Millions watched every time she made a mistake. Online arguments grew out of every disagreement with Amy. Her inadequacies were only made worse by the strain of being publicly scrutinized. And although the sisters initially portrayed themselves as a cohesive one, soon enough, rifts in that alliance started to show. After all, reality TV not only captures life, but also amplifies it. And as Tammy and Amy's paths began to diverge, the connection that had served as their fulcrum started to erode. The difference between Tammy's loneliness and Amy's achievements. The sharp contrast between the sisters' trajectories was one of the show's most striking features. Amy underwent geriatric surgery and started losing weight because she was determined to alter her life. Her achievements created opportunities Tammy could only observe from a distance. With the delivery of her son Gage and the subsequent preparations for the arrival of her second child, Amy quickly celebrated becoming a mother. She bought a new house, started a family, and created a life that was thriving in every aspect. Viewers observed her significant life events as if they were chapters in a narrative of metamorphosis. Tammy's narrative, however, took a different turn. She disregarded workout regimens, opposed diet plans, and became aggressive when family members or assistants attempted to help. Amy, who had been her closest ally, became more irate as a result of her refusal to take assistance. Tissa, a health aide, was introduced, which only made things worse. It made Tammy resentful rather than inspired. She felt trapped, smothered, and more averse to change than before. The sisters' once unbreakable friendship started to deteriorate due to conflicting agendas. While Tammy continued to engage in her destructive behaviors, Amy's attention turned to being a mother and creating a secure home. It was devastating for the supporters to witness. Two sisters who had embarked on their adventure together were now in quite separate worlds. This widening gap was more than simply sentimental, it was a metaphor. It demonstrated how one person's success may occasionally magnify another's hardships, making defeat seem much more daunting. To deal with her sister's success and her own stagnation, Tammy turned to risky coping strategies that would soon lead her into the worst period of her life. Tammy's breaking point: into the darkness. Tammy's downhill trajectory took time to develop. It was brought on by years of denial, unresolved anguish, and the solitude that weighed her down until it was intolerable. Her body eventually failed, since her health had gotten so bad by the end of 2021. She had such a serious medical emergency that physicians had to put her in a medically induced coma with no idea when she would awaken. The distinction between reality TV and real life became more hazy for viewers who had been watching her suffer for years. The terror was unadulterated and unrefined, yet the drama was captured on camera. The terrible prospect of losing her permanently confronted her family, who had begged her for years to take her health seriously. Tammy saw the coma as a symbolic and bodily reckoning. It marked the intersection of years of bad habits, denial, and stubbornness with an unavoidable truth. Her body was at its limit. By the time she finally opened her eyes, Tammy had changed from being the obstinate sister who dismissed worries. She was someone who had survived by facing death head-on. Although it didn't immediately inspire her, it made her realize that she was no longer living her life alone. People were interested in her survival. Her admirers, her family, and even her social media detractors. All of them had been incorporated into her tale. Her coma turned into a breaking point that compelled her to act. She had to stop disobeying her body's signals. What came next was neither easy nor glamorous, and it was definitely not quick. However, it also signaled the beginning of Tammy's most challenging phase. She would be put to the test in ways she had never been put to before during the months-long rehabilitation process. The lengthy lift, rehabilitation, surgery, and a drastic change. Rehab, a term that seems straightforward until you live with it, was the first step towards recovery. For more than 14 months, Tammy was confined to a rehabilitation center where the structure, routine, and discipline she had previously rejected controlled every day. Dietary restrictions took the place of late-night binges. The solitude gave way to hours of supervised therapy. Small, unglamorous successes like taking a few more steps, lowering oxygen dependency, and gradually rebuilding a body that had been damaged for decades were used to gauge progress. Tammy started to demonstrate dedication for the first time. After her near-death experience, she had a revelation. She wasn't immediately free of her problems, but she was prepared to fight in a new way. There was a change in the doctors who had previously said that because of her stature and health risks, she might never be eligible for surgery. Then, in the middle of 2022, the hitherto unattainable milestone, bariatric surgery, came to pass. The process wasn't risk-free. Surgeons were aware that Tammy's body posed risks that most patients didn't, but it was a success in spite of everything. Together with ongoing rehabilitation, the surgery caused a remarkable change that even her most critical critics were taken aback by. By the middle of 2025, Tammy's weight had decreased from more than 700 pounds to about 185 pounds. She had shed the equivalent of multiple adult bodies. To put it in context, it was an amazing transformation. Nevertheless, she continued to struggle after dropping the weight. It was the start of a new set of difficulties that were equally agonizing but far less obvious to the audience. She had been saved by losing weight. However, it had also left her with internal and external scars that she now had to learn to live with. Transformation's hidden cost and the new physique. There is frequently an unseen consequence to significant weight loss. The aftermath was a body that Tammy hardly recognized. There were thick folds of loose skin hanging from her arms, chin, and tummy, even though the pounds had melted away. The mirror displayed a different kind of hardship, while the scale represented triumph. To proceed, she had many surgeries to remove extra skin, one of which removed over 15 pounds off her body in a single operation. It was difficult to recover. Incisions required ongoing attention, mobility remained restricted, and facing such a significantly changed physique has a huge emotional cost. Moreover, she had not yet completed her journey. Her legs still had noticeable skin folds that limited her range of motion and served as a reminder that change is a gradual process rather than an instant miracle. Then followed yet another unforeseen conflict: her mouth. Due to the effects of years of neglect and ill health, Tammy had to have considerable dental work done. Her face was bloated and bruised from extractions, dental bridges, and agonizing recuperations. She was devastated by the procedure, which was medically required. Healing became much more difficult for someone who was already having confidence issues when she looked into the mirror and saw a face she hardly knew. It is often overlooked by outsiders because losing weight is never a happy ending. The conclusion that reality TV frequently promotes is not a fairy tale. The road is messy, continuous, and intensely emotional, with new struggles emerging as the previous ones fade. In addition to saving her life, Tammy's metamorphosis left her with financial, emotional, and physical wounds that would influence the next chapter of her life. And as her body recovered from surgery after surgery, her bank account started to show that there was another problem on the horizon: the awful financial consequences. Fans believed Tammy was at last stable after she had completed her body-altering surgeries, survived rehabilitation, and undergone surgery. She was the star of a popular TLC show that attracted millions of viewers. After all, her financial situation was undoubtedly safe. However, the reality behind the cameras was rather different. Tammy has a lot of financial issues in her life. She had previously owned a duplex in Kentucky worth around $240,000 with Amy. However, when Tammy was unable to pay her rent, her living condition became precarious. Rehab expenses mounted. Additionally, she was on her own this time, even though TLC had previously paid for her medical care. Her Ohio treatment stay consumed every cent of her Social Security check, leaving her with virtually nothing left over for everyday costs. Fans were astonished to learn that a reality TV star could be impoverished, but Tammy's story brought to light a terrible reality. There is no assurance of security just because you are on TV. Her living expenditures, contracts, and medical bills soon exceeded her paychecks. Tammy was having financial difficulties even as her narrative attracted viewers for the networks. When Tammy had nowhere else to go, Amy stepped in to offer support and a place to stay. However, the partnership was shaky and short-lived. Leaning on her sister once more added to the stress and anguish of a woman already struggling to keep her independence. Her mental health suffered as a result of her financial insecurity. It served as a sobering reminder that even though Tammy had changed her physical appearance, many of the most difficult aspects of life persisted. And another heartbreak struck while she was trying to rebuild her shaky independence. She could never have imagined how it would alter her personal life. An unexpected death, a wedding, and a separation. For an instant, Tammy Slaton's life appeared to be finally moving in the direction of happiness. She met Caleb Willingham, who she married in November 2022 while she was a patient at the rehabilitation center. Their bond appeared sincere, based on common hardships and the solace of discovering someone who was aware of the strain of residing in a body that frequently felt hostile. Many admirers said that Tammy's wedding was enchanting, full of promises, laughing, and a sense of hope that they hadn't seen in years. It appeared to have a pleasant ending to outsiders. The compassionate reality show enjoys presenting it in a tidy bow. But a ceremony on television is never as straightforward as real life. Within months, fissures appeared. Due to their inability to reconcile their personal wants with the difficulties of sustaining a marriage in the face of ongoing health issues, Tammy and Caleb split by May 2023. The tragedy that ensued was even worse than the agony of the separation. Only 8 months after their vows, Tammy became a widow when Caleb passed away 2 months later due to problems related to his weight. She grieved in a complex way. At first, Tammy acknowledged she felt betrayed and upset that she had been abandoned so quickly. The feelings wavered between incredulity, grief, and frustration. But eventually, the rage turned into acceptance. She realized that the tragic result of events that reflected her own previous hardships was Caleb's death rather than a decision. She preserved jewelry fashioned from his ashes as one of the most intimate mementos of her grief journey, taking him with her in a material form that gave her peace during her quiet times. Tammy believed she was starting to move over the emotional scars caused by Caleb's death. It served as a reminder that love could not protect her from the merciless hand of fate, and that tragedy may strike even in the midst of fresh starts. And as she was still figuring out how to live without him, the Slaton family was going to take another hit that would further tarnish the already bleak picture of her life. Another farewell, the sickness of Katie and the sorrow of the Slaton family. Less than a year after Tammy's husband passed away, her world was upended once more, this time due to her cousin Katie Slaton's terrible illness. Thousand P Sisters viewers were familiar with Katie due to her sporadic appearances on the program. She was much more than just a familiar face to Tammy and her family, though. Katie was characterized as vivacious, giving, and warm. The kind of person whose presence could fill an entire room. This added to the heartbreaking nature of her diagnosis. Stage 4 gastric adenocarcinoma, an uncommon and deadly kind of stomach cancer, was Katie's diagnosis at the beginning of 2025. The fight was quick and brutal. Despite receiving chemotherapy, Katie's condition deteriorated, and on August 25, 2025, she died at the age of 37. The Slaton family and their large fan base were taken aback by the news. This tragedy was intolerable to Tammy, who had already experienced so much grief. In mourning, the family came together. Their tight relationship was demonstrated by the fact that Tammy had started a fundraising earlier in the year to assist Katie with medical costs. Following her death, Tammy's sister Amanda sent her condolences on social media, praising Katie as a formidable opponent and requesting prayers for her partner and kids. The poignant comments depicted a woman who was incredibly adored and whose absence left an unfathomable void. It was more than just saying goodbye to a cousin when Tammy lost Katie. It had to do with losing one of the few individuals who had provided unwavering love and compassion. Her own near-death experience and the sadness she experienced after her husband's death combined to create a burdensome emotional load that could have easily broken her spirit. Nevertheless, Tammy continued to advance. She continued filming. She continued to share details of her life with the audience. Despite the intense grief, the cameras continued to record a lady who refused to fully withdraw from society, no matter how painful it was. The path ahead: criticism and comebacks. In 2025, Tammy Slaton found herself at a turning point in her life that few could have predicted. She was no longer the woman who had been on the verge of death. Rather, she was living evidence that change was possible, even if it was gradual, unpleasant, and frequently messy. However, a new type of attention, one that was as brutal and inspirational, came with survival. Tammy continued to get unrelenting criticism online. Trolls made fun of her looks, obsessively focused on her extra skin, or brought up her prior mistakes as though her metamorphosis wasn't enough. These assaults may have been devastating for someone who had struggled with anxieties her entire life. Tammy, however, frequently resisted, highlighting perseverance, self-love, and the reality that her journey was about survival more than purity. There were supporters who viewed her as a ray of hope for every critic, evidence that perseverance and determination could accomplish the seemingly impossible. Tammy was paving the way for fresh starts. In her worst moments, she explored jobs and modeling chances that she never would have imagined. She announced her engagement to Andrea Dalton in 2025, ushering in a new era of love following the devastating loss of Caleb. It was an indication that Tammy had not shut herself off to happiness in spite of the catastrophes. The dynamic that first captivated viewers had changed due to Tammy's metamorphosis. Therefore, the future of the 1,000-pound sisters remained unknown. However, Tammy's trip was far from over. Whether or not the cameras continued to roll, it was developing into a larger entity than television. It's not the series of disasters Tammy faced that make her story so memorable, but rather the fortitude she displayed each time life attempted to shatter her. Despite her near-death coma, financial difficulties, Caleb's death, and Katie's passing, she came out upright, but she wasn't unharmed. And maybe that's why admirers are still crying over her story. Beyond all the news stories and online arguments, Tammy Slaton embodies a very human quality: the obstinate will to persevere in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. What are your thoughts regarding Tammy Slaton's tragic and emotional journey? Tell us in the comments section. Thank you for viewing. In the next one, see you.